structures within the entertainment business to give you a career. So when everybody was going on the internet and building podcasts and making sketches and being independent and getting a fan base, many of you guys were sitting there waiting for your pilot to get picked up or to get a writing job. And you were betting on the institutions, the same institutions who said a couple of years later they wanted to replace you with AI. Those guys, those institutions. And you wanted to make sure that you didn't go on a podcast and say anything offensive because God forbid somebody at one of those institutions that you were all depending on who now want to replace you with AI, you wanted to make sure that none of them were offended, not any of those executives in their 10,000 square foot homes in Malibu. You did not want them to see a tweet or hear something you said on a podcast that was offensive. So you stayed away from the internet. You huddled and you hunkered down and you said, fuck it, I'm waiting for the good people at Comcast or wherever to give me a job. And listen, cool, fine. But nobody prevented you from having a podcast. Nobody prevented you from getting a fan base on the internet. And certainly nobody prevented you from having Tim Walsh or Kamala Harris on that podcast. Nobody prevented anybody from going on any podcast. In fact, Kamala had a standing offer to go on Joe Rogan. She would not show up to Austin and sit there for 2 hours. She wanted Joe Rogan to fly to her and sit there for 45 minutes where she could give tightly scripted answers to questions that he would bring up. And Joe Rogan, who's a friend of mine, was not trying to do a gotcha thing. Nobody did. None of the podcast interviews with politicians are gotcha interviews. That's not what a podcast is. A podcast is a conversation between two people. You watch my interview with JD Vance, you leave it going, oh, I know what he believes. I have a good idea of what he's putting forward as his beliefs, and that's going to guide and shape the things he does. But you know, it's not an interview where you're trying to embarrass somebody or call them out. And that's not what Joe was trying to do with Kamala at all. He wanted to sit there and talk with her. Now, the problem is if you don't have any deeply held beliefs, that might come out over 2 hours on the Joe Rogan Experience. If you don't believe in anything except your own advancement, that might come out in 2 hours. There was a reason that her people told her not to do that interview. I don't know what that reason is, but I can imagine they said, we don't want you sitting there unscripted for 2 hours. We don't know what will happen. But nobody prevented her from doing it. This is her choice. That was the campaign's choice. In the same way that every comedian has a choice to do something online or not. You can do you don't have to do a podcast. Nobody's prevented. But I've never looked at comedians that disagree with me and say that they are less of a comic or that they are dangerous. Or Mark Maron had a show on Air America for many years. He had one of the most successful podcasts in the world and still does. I think he's a hilarious comedian. And I don't think because me and him would disagree on things that he's less of a comedian or less of a person or whatever. You know, I don't understand where that comes from. I don't understand where that comes from. And this idea of all these podcasts, they're right-wing, these podcasts. We came through a period of time where the prevailing wisdom in the comedy community was that people that didn't line up 100% with the ideology that was emanating at that, you know, from the universities or from the larger media institutions and from the entertainment business, if you did not line up with that ideology 100%, you paid a price for it. You paid a financial price and a social price for it. And a lot of the people that were unwilling to line up with that ideology had to be on the internet. There was no other choice. Many of them didn't get work. Many of them were prevented, or the things that they could do, they didn't have an interest in doing because they didn't want to feel that they were being controlled or stymied in any way, so they wanted to be on the internet. And I'm one of the people that wanted to be on the internet. I enjoy it and I have fun and I talk shit and I say what I want and people can like it or not like it, doesn't matter. But if you take away from this historic beating, this complete, stunning, I thought he would win, but not in the way that he won. Like, if your takeaway here is that somehow the rejection of everything that you believe is Theo Von's fault, you're insane. And you'll never win anything ever again. You have to meet people where they are. You cannot always drag people to you. Everyone's racist. Everyone's homophobic. Everyone's transphobic. Everyone's a misogynist. Everyone hates you. How do you make it through the day? How do you make it through the day? How do you get up every day? Everyone's hating you all the time.